I remember the first time I ever heard about Microsoft Teams back in 2019 as a graduate assistant at my university's sports and recreation department. I had started 2 years earlier as a weight room monitor, which meant sitting at a podium with a laptop that served no purpose. Most of my job was when someone came up and asked if they could check out a weight belt for me to pretend that we didn't have any. But like the good little worker I was, I eventually climbed the ranks over the next 2 years to become the middlest of all middle management, managing the day-to-day tasks of other sweat janitors. It was, and still is, the lowest stakes job I can possibly think of. On Mondays, at 8 in the morning, we had team meetings. My boss brought it to us with a grand announcement saying that we've been working with IT to start using this new thing Microsoft's rolling out. It's called Teams, and it's like Slack, but for work. I know what you're thinking. Slack's already for work. But I didn't have the heart to tell him. He was smiling with such innocent joy. This grown man whose brown leather belt broke the largest cardinal sin of Reddit's male fashion advice, which is that belts shouldn't actually be necessary to hold up your khakis. This brings us to the first major question about Microsoft Teams. Who is this for? There can be no question, Microsoft Teams was designed specifically for the people in that room. My boss began the meeting by distributing a fistful of index cards to each of us, and on each one, he asked us to write a noun that we felt represented one of our core values. My boss collected the cards, shuffled them, and then dealt them into a 5-column grid, still face down. The intention was for none of us to be able to tell who had written what. A detail somewhat negated by the fact that each of us had been given cards of different colors, but whatever. We were asked to place each card in a line representing a scale from accurate to aspirational. I have a couple issues with this, the first of which is that those two words are not antonyms. Second of all, and I cannot stress this enough, it was 8 in the morning. We wrote lists of what machines needed wiping. Why are we doing this? The people who find that sort of thing a good use of time. That's who Teams is for. And since then, I've been using Microsoft Teams on and off against my will for the past 6 years as I've worked with various different organizations. Each time I would boot up my computer to use it, I would type anguished communications through it into some company-issued laptop, which was always one of those truly cursed eldritch machines that when you look into it, you might expect to find instead of a CPU that it runs on some sort of water wheel or potato clock. But when you actually find normal specs, you're left wondering how on earth could a $1,300 laptop possibly crash just from having 2 Chrome tabs open at once. On some occasions, I've even been forced to rely on a combined stack of Teams and Outlook for the entirety of my work communications, which is a direct violation of several anti-torture laws, by the way. So I am very well versed in this platform, its features, and its ability to run on machines outside the narrow range of its intended systems. It is with this experience that I give to you the Chainlift review of Microsoft Teams. Believe it or not, I do have nice things to say about Microsoft Teams. Teams does, to its credit, do what it says it's supposed to. And it's recognizable as a piece of software designed after the year 2015. It's also relatively easy to navigate, using a common list detail view with the navigation rail on the left, which ironically, according to its own official Figma design kit, this component is not what they call the rail, that's what they call this list. But we will get back to that later. The majority of your time is going to be spent with the chat screen open, so we'll start there. Connectivity is pretty reliable. Microsoft Teams' greatest strength is that it does make and receive video calls without constantly dropping them. It is pretty rare that I'll lose connection with someone, and if a connection is shoddy, it's almost always due to the network strength of one of the participants and not the platform itself. You can also send huge files on this thing. I've never found a file too large to share over Teams. I'm positive that there must be some limit, but I've never encountered it, nor have I ever needed to look it up, and I've had to work on PowerPoints with file sizes in the doubles of digits of gigabytes. The emojis are spectacular. I'm genuinely blown away by the level of artistry in the emoji library available inside of Teams. It's open source, by the way. These things are simply gorgeous. It's so inconsistent with the dry corporate atmosphere of the rest of the Office ecosystem that it actually makes me wonder, like, there's no way they invented these things in-house, right? Look at them. These cannot have come from the same creative team that produced this UI. The search is better than Outlook. Granted, it would almost have to be, but I do appreciate being able to type some vague phrase that I barely remember a coworker mentioning several weeks ago into the chat bar, and being able to find it pretty reliably on the first try. I've seen other tech reviewers and people in general talk about how Spotlight Search on the Mac sets the standard for how universal search ought to behave, which honestly I think is a little unfair. Apple did not invent global search, and I may have been 7 when I was first using Windows XP, but I still remember how intuitive search felt on that. Still, if Spotlight's the A+, then I'm gonna say Teams Search is at least a B+, but the remainder of good points that come to mind for me are not truly good. They are merely the absence of pain, which should not be cause for celebration in an app produced by a corporation with a $3 trillion market cap as of the day I'm writing this script. So let's move on to the far more substantial part of this review, the bad. The video call experience in Microsoft Teams is an exercise in public humiliation. For one thing, the app has an auto-muting feature, as do most of its competitors, and it appears to run in the background and self-activate when a call exceeds an unknown critical mass of participants. The behavior of this feature, though, is completely unpredictable. It never really communicates to you when this feature is active, if it is at all. Nor does it explain the activation pattern. I've never found anything in the settings that gives me explicit control over it. Even Googling auto mute in Teams doesn't reveal anything substantial from the Teams help docs, only a labyrinth of community forum posts discussing a feature we all agree definitely exists, yet there's no easily findable documentation. As a result of this auto-muting feature, the phrase "you're on mute" has been uttered so often that the syllables have started fusing together through the linguistic process of syncope. The same process that turned "give me" into "gimme" and "want to" into "wanna" has given birth to "you're on mute." I know it's not just me. Go ahead and listen the next time you're on a Teams call. And when you hear it, let it sink in just how often that has to happen in order for a syncope to take shape. In other words, the auto-mute function in Teams is designed so poorly, it is literally altering the English language in front of our very eyes. And there's nothing any of us can do to stop it. Speaking of unstoppable forces, let's move on to notifications. The sound of a Teams notification makes my blood pressure spike. Of course, this might not be a flaw. It could very well be completely out of Microsoft's control. I know people have similar reactions to the noise Slack makes. I don't have that problem, but I don't use Slack that much. So some people might understandably ask if the Teams sound is truly annoying, or is it that I've simply come to associate it with being interrupted by things I don't care about? I would argue there is something about that specific noise that strikes the ear especially offensively. The sound design department at Microsoft, I'm convinced, has engineered the perfect musical simulacrum of a passive-aggressive coworker leaning over your cubicle wall and whispering, "I'm sorry, I broke it again." Are these noises triggering because I associate them with Teams? Or are they like that on their own? The answer is yes. Furthermore, it notifies me entirely too often. Of everything. I don't understand why anyone would want to be notified of anything that doesn't mention them directly, but Teams has decided that it's important to be acoustically interrupted whenever somebody reacts to a message of yours with a heart. And for that matter, notifications shouldn't make noise at all by default. You should have to go out of your way to turn it on. Teams does the opposite, and it turns them back on every time the app updates, which is exactly every 30 minutes. But they don't just make noise by default, they also make noise during calls by default. Now, the mere existence of this feature and the fact it's a default setting tells me a lot about what it must be like to work as a designer at Microsoft. Nobody, and I mean nobody, would tell you that that's a good idea. I guarantee you, if I were to survey 100 random users and ask them if they would like this setting on by default, at most 5 of them would say yes. And I know that figure because the NIH estimates about only 1 to 5% of people have masochistic disorders. I'm afraid it gets worse from here because notifications don't just make sound by default. They don't just make sound during calls by default. Notifications also display with full content previews during calls by default. If you're wondering why this is such an upsetting development, you must not have to share your screen very often, but imagine you do. And imagine you're giving a presentation when one of your coworkers sends you some scalding hot office gossip spilled right into your face. I do that to people all the time.
Hey, Garrett here from the editing room. This isn't true, actually. I mean, it does do that, but according to this help video that I found while trying to find elements for the screen sharing, I found this nauseating video that clarifies participants won't see any notifications. I feel obliged to show it to you.
We share a window, meeting participants won't see any notifications that might come in.
I mean, sure.
How many of us would think to go out of our way to make sure stuff like this isn't allowed to happen? I would wager very few. I certainly didn't. I wasn't even aware this was a problem until after it had already happened to me. And the reason for that is that we aren't trained to be cautious about our software anymore. Microsoft certainly set the tone during its early dominance back in the early aughts that software is a complicated, terrifying thing that ought to be handled very delicately, or else you will destroy everything and everyone that you care about. You cannot deny their interfaces from that time instill a certain degree of fear in their user base. After all, nothing says bow down quite like the first glance at an Excel toolbar. These default notification settings in Teams are so indicative of this exact kind of design philosophy and attitude that has rendered an entire generation of people horrified of their computers. You think I'm exaggerating? Have you ever tried to help your mom with the computer? Or anyone older, really, anyone whose first experience with a computer was before 2005. They will stare at an interface with a huge green button that says print, and then call you to ask, how do I print this out? This isn't stupidity as much as we like to joke about. It's learned helplessness. All it takes is one unexpected consequence of a button click for users to be afraid of every other button click from now on. There is a contract between users and software. Software promises that we don't have to worry about our safety. We don't worry about our food being poisonous because we assume there are too many checks along a product's journey to the grocery store for something dangerous to make its way there in the first place. And similarly, an app produced by a $3 trillion company has such an incomprehensible amount of social proof attached to it simply by the virtue of its own brand name that we assume it must be fine. It's so powerful that it can gaslight us into thinking, well, I must be technologically illiterate because surely the people who made this thing wouldn't allow such an obviously bad idea to pass all the way through to my work computer, would they? The design of this notification system may be toxic, but its actual physical form is downright radioactive. Notifications fester inside the app until the pressure builds so greatly that they begin to leak outside the app itself like the invisible spread of nuclear poison. Missed activity emails get sent once every hour by default. Unless you proactively check to make sure this will not happen, you will receive an email every hour containing all the notifications you've received in that time. I could literally go on all day about this, but we've still barely scratched the surface. So let's talk about chats. There's entirely too many of them. Every meeting gets its own chat, and they exist forever unless manually deleted. Normally this wouldn't be an issue because I'm fairly certain every video call service has to have a unique instance of a chat thread simply by the nature of how databases work. But Teams is uniquely ridiculous in that it will put the chats for the meetings in the same chat list view as your normal conversations. This isn't really a huge problem for one-on-one talks. But when you have a group project going on, it quickly becomes a nightmare. I've had a career project manager brilliantly decide to start a group chat for our pod at the beginning of a project. Unironically, a wise decision. After that, they set up a weekly check-in with the same participants. They named the calendar meeting the same thing as their group chat. Now, there are two identically named group chats within Teams with the same people right next to each other in the list. You might think that's merely annoying. You would be wrong. Because shortly after this project started, we added a fifth person. The thumbnails only display up to 4 profile pictures, and the text at the top of the chat, which displays everyone's names, has a fixed character limit. This means the only way to tell the difference between the original chat and the chat with the extra person in it is a hair-thin piece of text that says +1 in the chat's name in the list. Guess how often we put something in the wrong chat? In fact, I'd say there's a general sense of clutter. The Discover tab? What is this for? Is anyone casually perusing the latest updates of their workplace's Teams environment? Let's move on to file management. Unsurprisingly, companies that use Teams tend to rely heavily on other Office products as well. As a result, most of the files you'll be sending back and forth via Teams are other Microsoft Office file types. When you receive a Word doc, or a slideshow, a spreadsheet, Teams can and will transform the simple process of opening a file link into a Rube Goldberg level of complexity. Let's walk through a user flow that happens thousands of times on a daily basis around the world. Someone sends you a PowerPoint. You click it. After the first click, it opens a preview inside the Teams chat. Obviously, this is not what you want, because no one has ever wanted this. When have you ever asked someone to send you a PowerPoint simply so you could have the pleasure of perusing it? Naturally, you click it a second time, hoping maybe this time it'll download. This opens the file in a browser. Every time I've been sent a PowerPoint file and been told the comments are inside, my toes curl in anticipation of what's about to happen to me. You can't click the entire file chip without it transmogrifying the UI into an embedded Office interface. No, you must instead carefully slide your cursor on top of a grain of sand-sized options icon in order to find the download option, which finally allows you to download it normally. This is exponentially more humiliating the lower res your machine is, as the trackpad will fight you every step of the way, insisting that your click land 10 pixels offset from wherever you tapped, as if Microsoft itself were standing next to you in person, tugging on your arm like a needy, groveling toddler. When the app updates, Teams resets certain preferences, a gripe shared by users of Adobe products for decades. However, it also resets things that truly boggle the mind. For example, I've seen it reset a user's audio hardware setting, and it has on more than one occasion somehow reset my video hardware as well, even when I'm using a laptop that has a built-in camera and no connected peripherals whatsoever. It turned off its own access to the only camera. One update suddenly turned off the default option to have meetings you create in the Teams calendar be Teams meetings. So one morning, I accidentally added like 5 calendar events only to discover none of them had video links and were scheduled to take place in person nowhere. I suppose this is useful for some, but those meetings involved my boss's boss's boss. That's 3 levels of humiliation, and I've got news for you. Teams is broken is the professional equivalent of saying the dog ate your homework. Nobody's buying it, no matter how true it is. At long last, the UI. Microsoft Teams physically gets in the way of what you're trying to do at almost every step. When screen sharing, for example, a massive call module appears that covers nearly 25% of the viewport width and all of its height. Upon minimizing it, a biblical Leviathan-sized UI bar appears at the top of the screen. This bar contains features I have never used, and I don't know anyone else who ever has. For that matter, it's right on top of your browser tabs. There's no obvious way to dismiss it either. Your only hope is to pitifully drag it out of the way. Teams breaks its own design system rules on a regular basis. To exemplify this, I'm going to talk about the shadows on these layout panels. Why on earth are they inside shadows? Microsoft's own fluid design system guidelines provide thorough specs on how to properly use elevation, which abide by all the standard practices we've come to expect from similar systems like the Human Interface Guidelines and Material. So why does the UI's 3-panel interface cascade an elevation from right to left? It may seem like a small design detail, but to me it sticks out like a flaw that despite years of exposure, my eyes have yet to fully adjust to. It is the mole on your mom's friend's face that she made you promise not to stare at. Yet for all that, I get what they're doing. I mean, I don't know anyone at Microsoft, but I'm willing to bet these designers figured, well, okay, the greatest focal point of the UI is the body content, that module, so we can use elevation to signify that it's at the front of your mind. It naturally follows it should be at the front of the UI. But here's the thing. Color contrast is plenty. Pure white backgrounds on a light-themed UI will always draw the highest level of focus and seem far more important than containers will of any other color. Off-white. They just do. It's a well-established principle in illustration and graphic design. If you think I'm wrong, you're probably thinking about the common rule of thumb known as atmospheric perspective, which states that objects in the foreground are typically darker than those in the background. A quick Google image search of the term atmospheric perspective will show you what I'm talking about. But foreground doesn't equal focus. Look at these images, for example. All of these landscapes are inviting your eyes to gaze into the distance, towards the light. Look into the light. But UI design doesn't use atmospheric perspective. It's more like studio photography. In software, there's an imaginary light source, often called a key light, that points universally down from the top of the screen, meaning it's not top center, it's the entire upper x-axis casting light downwards. Key lights cast shadows on the surfaces underneath them. If I put a sheet of paper on top of another sheet of paper, the shadow is cast from the one on top. Duh. So let's get back to Teams. What's going on here? The light is being cast from the right, but only on the modules underneath the top navbar. The top navbar casts no shadow, except there is a key light at the top because the search bar has a very faint drop shadow on it. Yet the top bar's container doesn't really have one at all. The size, blur, and position of these shadows is so inconsistent that the end result is like one of those Penrose triangles where you can't really tell where the front is. Furthermore, we don't want apps jutting out of the screen at our faces. When we look at a computer monitor, we are looking into it. We expect the lightest part of the screen to be the closest to us. Generally speaking. That doesn't mean you can't have white elements in the center of the screen, but it does mean that you have to have consistent stacking of elements. But there is no consistency of z-index here. Things overlap others from right to left, only to no-clip straight into the back rooms when they meet the top bar. These drop shadows, they're creating an environment where everything somehow manages to be on top of everything else. I hate it. The best thing about Teams is its emojis, as I mentioned earlier, which from what I can tell must have received about 96% of their design budget. They are utterly joyful things with rich, colorful detail that invites the user into a lavender fantasy of serene, delightful productivity. Just look at their marketing materials from the Google Play Store. Bear witness to the sanguine, jolly future they paint. But like an American university, the cheerful facade falls away as soon as you've signed on the dotted line. They've got your money, now you're on your own. The lavender has now been replaced with a petroleum-tinted shade of non-committal purple, or as I like to call it, ashes muck. Seriously, I don't know what else to call this. It's the sort of wishy-washy indigo that's halfway situated between Maria Bamford's Depression Duluth Blue and Stripe's signature Blurple. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if I found out that their original intent had been to choose a more electrified purple. After all, as much as I hate Microsoft's design system at large, their color choice can be delightfully saturated, especially when it comes to blue. I can't say they aren't nailing it when it comes to blue. That said, whoever chose sun-bleached traffic cone orange for PowerPoint owes me an explanation. Orange, more commonly known as neon brown, is easily the worst color, and they should have known better. I would have chosen red, but I wasn't born when they made these decisions, so now I have to live with the consequences. I'm also not a fan of this weird hospital-grade teal they've used for Publisher and SharePoint. I'm not sure what's going on there, but it's essentially the same color as the logo of the hospital where I had my removed. And if something reminds you of a hospital, it had better be a hospital. The big picture. Microsoft Teams embodies the ethos of Microsoft Office, in that it gets the job done well enough, but I'm unconvinced this was the best version of Teams that could have made its way to market. There are simply too many designers out there and too much precedent for this kind of application for the current outcome to be the best possible result. Now, I've worked on product teams before, and I understand how sometimes you've just got to push things through the pipeline in order to avoid getting stuck in development heck. Consequences be darned. You'll patch it later. Furthermore, some organizations simply have no choice but to use Teams. As much as I loathe the reality, business does run on Microsoft, but business also runs on other businesses. And this is becoming increasingly true when it comes to in-house development needs at non-tech industry companies. Companies like Chainlift, for example, exist to fill the need for ad hoc techies to support acute requirements for things like redoing websites. It doesn't make sense for a company to hire in-house talent to perform a job that they're only going to have to do once and then not maintain that often. In other words, when you need a website built, you don't necessarily need it to keep getting built forever. The reason I'm bringing this up is that it contextualizes why my final issue with Teams is the most severe. It is designed from a foundational level to be used internally. Organizations whose IT departments run on Azure like Teams because it's part of the Microsoft ecosystem. Apple has the walled garden, but Microsoft is like being under house arrest with a strict no visitors policy. In other words, inviting someone from an external domain to a property in your organization, like Teams, often involves getting security clearance. However, if your company is large enough, you can't just ask for security clearance because there's never just one person whose job it is to approve it. You have to submit a help desk request. The frontline techie will reach out to make sure they understand you correctly and route your request. You confirm. That takes a day. On day 2, you hear from somebody slightly higher up in IT, who again reaches out to confirm that you need an external party invited into the organization. You confirm once more. They reply to that, saying that in order to do so, they need to properly vet this third party. Depending on your industry, this might take longer than a week. You say sure, and a week goes by. You hear nothing. You follow up with that middle manager from IT to ask for progress. They in turn have to get an update from the person they asked. You ask if you could simply follow up with this mystery person yourself, to which they reply no. It would only make things worse. You realize that you are not the only one frustrated with this system. For you, this is an acute inconvenience, but for IT, it's everyday life. The freelancer, meanwhile, is blowing up your email asking for updates, and you don't have any. But your deadlines certainly aren't going anywhere. After 10 business days since submitting that first help desk request, you realize it would be so much easier to simply work around it and facilitate communications between your team and the freelancers. Then finally, your freelancer announces they've gone ahead and created their own Teams organization, and if you like, you can join theirs. This sounds so simple, and believe it or not, IT doesn't have an issue with it. So you rejoice and sign in, only to discover that once inside, you have lost all visibility of any activity from the other organization you were just in. Slack solves this problem by having a nav rail with all your organizations in it that's persistent, so it can display a notification badge when you have unread activity. Teams doesn't do this. The organizations menu is buried beneath a drop-down. In some cases, you have to sign completely out and then back in to a new account that uses the same email address. Now, you have to remember to toggle between organizations on a regular basis, lest you miss something. So what's the verdict here? Microsoft Teams is a high-friction experience. If the question is, does the app work, I would say job well done. It does perform its intended functions, and maybe to some, that's all that actually matters. But I wonder, how much time would you save if you took the hurdles off the track? How many people have accidentally closed out of career-defining presentations because they were trying to move some screen sharing toolbar out of the way? How much time has been wasted because someone thought they sent something in the right chat, but in fact, did not? quite a lot, I'd reckon. But sadly, this is all the time we have for today. Trust me, I could keep going. This video has only covered about 30% of the bullet points I took down in my original set of notes, but let's save the shade for another sunny day. In the meantime, you might be interested in some of our other videos where we dive equally deeply into UI design nuance that even the most pedantic among us would find esoteric and condescending. This one about spacing really seemed to resonate with some people. Maybe you'll like it too. But with that, I will leave you be. And if you need help with a website, app, or anything in between, please do not hesitate to reach out to Chainlift. We'll take you to the top so you can enjoy the fun part.